to Smooth 98.1. Love music, love life on a Thursday morning. Yes, it's a throwback Thursday morning, 31 minutes past 7 a.m. 21st day in the month of November 2024. The month is gradually running to a close. But what is not running is all the great stuff you look forward to and enjoy on the Smooth Breakfast. Ayokunmi here, ready to take you into the world of the papers. And of course, take a look at the headlines and making the rounds, getting us talking as well. This is Freshly Pressed. It's an interactive session, so it's going to be us taking a look at the headlines, analysis coming your way, and you, yes, you, sharing your thoughts with us, your opinions as well by sending your messages in on WhatsApp. The number remains 0809 444 0981. 0809 444 0981. We're also streaming on YouTube. You can find us at Smooth 981 FM Lagos. You can drop a comment there as well. We look forward to getting your thoughts. And please, I will say, please keep your messages as concise as possible. Let's be civil in our deliveries as well. It makes it easy to read and get around so I can get through all the messages within the time that we have. All right, joining me to analyze the stories this morning, Mr. C and Gbubemi as well. Good morning to you, gentlemen. Great to have you in.
Good morning, Ayokunmi. Good morning, Mr. C. Good morning, Lagos.
Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Gbubemi. Good morning, Lagos.
All right, all right, all right. Thank you for keeping it locked right here on Smooth 98.1. Let's begin our journey into the papers this morning, Mr. C. We're heading into the Vanguard, and the Senate has invoked the provisions of Section 157, subsection 1 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended, and sacked Yakubu Danladi Umar as the chairman of the Code of Conduct Tribunal, that's the CCT, for what it described as unacceptable acts of misconduct. Now, according to the Senate, it became imperative to remove him from that sensitive position because his actions were unbecoming of a holder of such an office and his level of gross misconduct no longer acceptable. What does this even mean, Mr. C?
Okay. Thank you, Ayo. So let's go back down memory lane because to understand why we're here, we need to understand what has transpired. Now, Mr. Danladi Umar was the chairman of the Code of Conduct Tribunal, and incidentally, he was the official who contributed largely to the removal of Justice Onogen as the CJN way back in 2019.
Okay.
He assumed jurisdiction in the matter. He clearly had no jurisdiction, and luckily, or fortunately, the matter has now been dealt with, even though Mr. Justice Onogen had to vacate the office for no clear reasons. Now, he was also involved in a street brawl with some vendor in Abuja, and there are all sorts of allegations against him. We understand the EFCC, the ICPC, and one other body are all investigating him. Now, this is where everything gets funny. On Thursday, the 4th of July, 2024, the Senate confirmed Mr. Abdullahi Usman Bello as the new chairman of the tribunal, meaning his name was submitted to the Senate. The Senate sat and approved Mr. President's request. Fast forward 4 months later, we're now told that the Senate met and sacked the previous guy. So for 4 months, did we have two chairmen?
That's a very important question to ask. I mean, you can't have two chairmen in that position.
Because if you only sacked him in November,
and you had already met over a new chairman as far back as July.
You had confirmed a new chairman in July. Between July and November, what exactly happened? Or what exactly was going on? Who was collecting salaries? Were we paying two different individuals salaries for the same job? The new guy, did he ever resume? If he did not resume, why? Now, more importantly, the Senate says they relied on Section 157, subsection 1 of the Constitution to remove Mr. Danladi Umar. Now, for the benefit of our listeners, very quickly, subject to the provisions of subsection 3 of this section, the person holding any of the offices to which this section applies may only be removed from that office by the President, acting on an address supported by 2/3 majority of the Senate, praying that he be so removed for inability to discharge the functions of his office, and it goes on.
Okay.
Now, Was there such an address from the president? If there was, what's the date?
Where is it?
Because the president appoints subject to the confirmation of
The Senate.
Now, the Senate by itself cannot sack any public officer. So I don't understand what they did yesterday. I can't explain it. And I'm a legal practitioner. I simply can't explain it. Because in the absence of an address from the president, on what basis did you hold that sitting and then proceed to a vote? And then this is where it gets more interesting. They say 74 signed, 10 present. What does that mean?
Who are those that signed? Who are those that were not there? And
No. So if you met physically, why is there a distinction between those who signed and those who were present? Are you suggesting 74 senators were not present? Because 74 signed, 10 present for a hearing that was physically done, not virtually, according to them. So why do you have that discrepancy? What's going on? But more importantly, right, is this a precedent they're trying to set so that going forward we'll see more of these incidents where the law is seemingly turned upside down? Now, I'm not saying the president doesn't have the right to fire anybody. They're his appointees. You serve at the pleasure of the president. And where you feel you do not serve at his pleasure, you can go to court and seek your remedies. But here, the Senate clearly didn't appoint him as Mr. President. Now, you've accused him of certain things. Has there been an investigation? Now, this is where natural justice comes in. The investigations are ongoing. Is there a report out? Is any of all the investigations, none has been completed from the story. So on what basis was he removed? The fact that he's accused of doing certain things does not mean in law he did them.
Until he's found guilty, at least.
Until there's a finding. And he's had the chance to even present his own side of the story. From what the Senate did yesterday, that didn't happen. Because even by the Senate's own admission, the investigations are ongoing. So on what basis did you remove him?
Even if, Mr. C, even if an investigation is going on now, I mean, would it not be a case of worst case scenario suspending him pending conclusion?
Yeah, but this is even where it gets more ridiculous. As far back as July, you've confirmed a new guy. So why wasn't he removed? And then what was the basis for confirming a new guy if the old guy hadn't been sacked or suspended? It's very untidy, and it begs the question. We have a very sound lawyer who is Attorney General of the Federation and Minister for Justice. Again, I'm sitting down here and I'm wondering, was he consulted? The Senate also has lawyers within its midst. There are a couple of fine, outstanding senior advocates within the Senate. Were they consulted? Did the Senate consult anyone before it did what it did? I concede that if it's time for Mr. Omar to go, if they don't want him there, they don't want him there. But at least follow the procedures, follow the process. That's the only way we'll have strong institutions. We can't continue to have incidents like this. And then in all of this, yet again, we're looking for foreign investors. And these foreign investors, they're not illiterate. They can read and write. They can understand legal professions.
They can see things play out.
Yes, they can see for themselves. They can even consult Nigerian lawyers and say, explain this. And Nigerian lawyers will be struggling to explain this. And then you expect that things will magically get better.
You just begin to wonder. This is Zeman from Bristol says, there's no need to try to rationalize the behavior of the National Assembly members. Only remember what one of them said about his colleagues taking and selling hard drugs. That would explain their overall conduct. I wonder. It just feels like, in Nigeria, everything, I don't even have the words, but anyways, let's continue on our trajectory here and take a story coming out of the Vanguard. I'm coming to you with this one, and of course, we're talking about electricity matters again. We've been having a lot of conversations about that in the last couple of weeks. Now, the House of Reps has called for a comprehensive reform of Nigeria's electricity distribution companies, that's the DISCOs, proposing a 500 billion naira recapitalization plan. Now, this initiative aims to ensure that only financially stable companies operate, thereby enhancing service delivery to the consumers. Discos have been under the eye of the storm recently, and hey, House of Reps have said this is something being considered. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so if we remember, the electricity supply industry was unbundled about, I think, 11 years ago, 2013, if I'm correct. And that was the period where before then we had the Power Holding Company of Nigeria, was it the Power Holding Corporation?
Company, PHCN, yeah.
Yeah. And so what the government did at that time was to unbundle the PHCN into several distribution companies. I think we had about 11, and get private investors to invest into them. Also, and also the generation companies, power generation companies, with the government holding responsibility for the transmission company. Now, at that time, I think as part of the privatization, government still has about 30 or 40% shares in each of all of these discos. And one of the arguments that these discos have always made right from time is that the cost of power needs to be reflective of, what they charge for power needs to be reflective of the cost that's put into it.
Right.
And what we've seen over the years is a lot of these discos have ended up struggling to the point where we are now. Some of them are under management by banks. One of them is under management by the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria. So I think we have about 6 out of these 11 that are under management, not by the initial managers, but have been taken over by their creditors.
For various reasons,
yeah. So clearly we can see if practically half of the distribution companies are under some form of receivership, then there's a lot of problem. And so they have also, the discos have always been crying out over the years that there needs to be a lot more money infused into it and all of that. So this is a good conversation to be had now. However, 500 billion, I'm not quite sure. So a lot of money has been pumped into power over the years.
Oh yes.
Barely seeing anything come out of it. I'm not sure whether 500 billion is a figure that was pulled out of a hat or whether there's been some sort of calculation to get to that point. 1, 2. Another thing we also need to also remember is that with the movement of power to the concurrent list and some of the states deciding to have their own distribution companies, this also needs to be factored in, because most likely some of these states will begin their own distribution companies. So if this 500 billion that's been sought, is sort of approved, how will it be shared? How will it be determined in terms of ownership? Because there'll be state ownership, then there's also the private sector ownership in conjunction with the federal government as well. I think that what the Senate needs to do is the House of Reps needs to do is to, admit what the real problem is. So there's a funding problem. And part of that problem is because these discos cannot charge appropriately for the power that's being provided. So one of the things that the NERC, Nigerian Electricity Regulation Commission, did was to approve that the banding process,
right,
quote unquote. So we've always had those bands, but early this year it was now approved that those who are placed on band A, meaning that they'll be guaranteed at least 20 hours of power supply every day, will pay the actual cost of power. And I say actual cost in quotes because that tariff is still regulated by the NERC. I can't remember how much it was, but I know it was reduced slightly a few months ago.
Very, very slightly.
Yeah, and I think there's a quarterly review for that price. Now, part of the reason why the band A prices are quite high is because of the cost of power generation. We're dependent on gas largely to generate power, and gas is sold in dollars. So we all know what's happening to our foreign exchange regime now. And as that climbs further high, it affects the price of all these things. So if on the assumption that everybody was paying cost reflective price, maybe the funding situation would have been a lot better, much, much better within the discos, but that's not the situation. Now, I'm not saying that the discos don't also have their own issues, because clearly they do as well. And I think that that may also partly be largely to maybe oversight problems, or, between the Ministry of Power, the NRC as well. Although I would say that they have tried across the years.
Not enough, really.
Yeah, to be honest. So for me anyway, laudable. But I'm just thinking, how are we sure, if this ends up going through, how are we sure that this 500 billion will not just dissolve through the cracks, and we wouldn't see?
Wouldn't be the first time. I mean, like you mentioned at the beginning, a lot of money has been sunk into that sector.
That sector, apart
So,
from the oil and gas sector,
what's the
probably
guarantee?
taking the most amount of money from this country.
So let me quickly hop in on this, right? So we must remember that when the discos first started out, a lot of them started out with capital that was insufficient. It's progressively gotten worse. Now, it's already clear we need at least $10 billion sunk in every year for the next 10 years. Now, that 500 billion converted to US dollars at the current rate is about 294 million USD. Now, for how long is this recapitalization? Now the dollar is retailing somewhere between 1.6 and 1.17.
1.7 thereabouts.
Yeah. When it gets to 2000, what happens?
If or when?
No, it's not if. When it gets to 2000, productivity hasn't gone up. We're still dancing around, faffing around, which is typical Nigerian style. So when it gets to 2000 or 2002 or 2003, will there be a need to recapitalize? Certainly. Where's the money going to come from? Now, even this, as Gbubemi said, 6 of them are already under AMCON's. They're already under AMCON, right? And banks. So what's the guarantee the rest out there can even raise the sum? Is there a deadline for raising it? Now, again, like he also said, how did we conjure 500? Why is it 500? Is there any logic around 500? I was just called out from thin air. So there are many, many questions, right? And a lot of these discos already owe huge sums of money to creditors, to suppliers. Now, when this money comes in and you clear out the outstanding debts, what's left? Is that money sufficient to carry out the real-time capital upgrades of the equipment that is required? And how long will $294 million last in terms of capital acquisitions, capital expenditure, given the fact that most of the things they need are not made in country, and even when you order them and they get here, there's the issue of duty to be paid.
It just seems like so many issues left, right, and center, and you begin to wonder, is there even a tunnel, let alone a light at the end of it? Questions, and more questions. Anyways, Mr. C, let's continue the conversation this morning. Let's jump into the previous times and talk about education. It's been a minute we did that. President Bola Tinubu has sacked the newly appointed Vice Chancellor of the Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Awka, Bernard Odo. Now, NAU, a federal university in Anambra State, is popularly known as UNIZIC. Now, President also dissolved the university's governing council, led by Greg Mbadiwe. There has been this drama in UNIZIC over the governing council, VC, and so on and so forth. But now the president, has sacked the newly appointed vice chancellor. Where does this leave them, and where are we going to?
Okay, so big questions. For the benefit of listeners who are not familiar with the story, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, UNIZIC purportedly carried out an exercise in which a new registrar and a new vice chancellor for the school emerged. Now, the local LASO chapter kicked and said, no, you didn't follow due process. The positions were not properly advertised. People weren't properly screened. And the governing council shut down those objections and said it had followed due process, referred to a court judgment that is said gave it the power to continue the process and complete it. Then we got new controversies surrounding the person of the VC that was appointed. Now, incidentally, he was a governorship aspirant in Ebonyi State under one of the parties in last year's general elections. Now we are told that there's some issue around his professorship, that he hadn't gotten it, he had gotten it. So purportedly he got it from the Federal University of Guso. They only yesterday confirmed that yes, indeed, he did get it. But the president has decided, look, you know what? Governing council plus registrar plus VC, everybody go. Now, what does that mean for the school? First of all, there's still a pro chancellor. There's still deputy vice chancellors. So between the three of them or the four of them, they will sort out the school until a governing council is appointed. But more importantly, it speaks again to the impunity that pervades the land. Why is there a difficulty, a continuing and persistent difficulty in following due process and procedure? What was the haste and urgency in appointing this VC? Even if he's so wonderful and he's going to take them to the promised land, where Unizik will now compete with the likes of MIT, Harvard, Yale,
and so on
Cambridge,
and so forth.
Yeah. Even if he's the man to do that, why not allow him to go through the process completely so that there'll be no questions, there'll be no complaints, there'll be no ambiguities about it? But no, we just rush it through because we're like, let's rush it through. Whoever doesn't like it, the person can head to court. Now, there's no court here because really and truly, is he going to fight the president in court? No, he's not. Now, bigger question, is it the president that sacks directly the VC? Is it the governing council? I haven't had time to look through the act setting up the university. But if he's aggrieved, then he has to ventilate his claims in the court of law. But this is a warning, and this is not the first time this sort of thing has happened. There's always politics around the appointment of a vice chancellor for any federal school. Because you then find that the indigents in the area where the school is located can tell you that the vice chancellor must be one of their own. And
no mattering whether or not he or she is competent to hold that position.
And then I'm going to slightly digress. There's a reason why a lot of Nigerian schools, especially the federal schools or the government-owned schools, federal and state, are not competitive because they're not run like business enterprises. In foreign schools, you have the academic side, and then you have someone who is pro-business, who is running the school, who is making sure the university is developing. Here, the government-owned universities seem to sit back and wait for government subventions, government allocations.
That's also very familiar.
And then once that's not coming, they start complaining. What attempts have you made? Okay, you have an alumni association. Are you tapping into that market? You have corporates. Are you presenting value propositions for them that will justify them investing in chairs in your various departments and faculties? So it goes beyond, oh, I want to be VC, it looks good. So someone who studied botany or someone who studied Christian religious studies, all of a sudden is made a VC. And you expect him to suddenly have a business perspective or business acumen. Not going to happen. But these guys, so Unizik, they have to appoint a governing council soon because this shouldn't stretch for too long. But this is a lesson. If you don't follow due process, due procedure, the end will not be bright.
Nigeria, the gift that keeps on giving. Damila from Lagos Island on WhatsApp says to Mr. C on the discourse, the real problem the discourse have is a competency problem. They are incompetent and have zero knowledge of how to run a retail power company. All they are doing is trial and error with more errors coming out at the end of the day. Dami from Ikeja says, any attempt to recapitalize the power sector without a structural reform of the entire system and removing the bad eggs in the system is simply throwing worse money after bad. For example, our Minister of Power who believes that switching off your fridge is the solution to the high cost of power. Well, Dami, if your freezer is completely frozen, turn it off for a couple of hours. It will help.
So a quick one. If you remove all the bad eggs, who's left?
We'll find good eggs somewhere. I don't know. We'll find good eggs. The beautiful ones are not yet born.
So we have to
Ayekwe Ama. Let's just get to the Guardian because we can go on that trajectory for the next 1 hour. Let's talk about this coming out of The House of Reps, a bill to modify the Constitution and enable voting from the diaspora, passed its second reading in the House of Reps yesterday. Now, the House also approved for second reading a bill to ensure adequate funding for mineral resource exploration and extraction through public-private partnerships. Now, I know that we've spoken here at some points very recently about why we can't have diaspora voting and so on and so forth. I remember maybe last week or thereabouts, or was it earlier this week? I can't remember specifically. But anyways, this has come out, and I mean, this should be seen as a step in the right direction, right?
Yes. So, interesting, what's it called now?
Development.
Development from the House of Representatives. One of the things I would have expected would have been that e-voting would have passed before diaspora voting, because I think e-voting is more important than diaspora voting, and that's, without any prejudice to those in the diaspora. I believe that, in fact, diaspora voting would probably even come under e-voting, because, for example, with e-voting you can vote from anywhere. So rather than just thinking that, oh, we want to be able to give opportunities for those in the diaspora to vote, most likely what that would probably entail is that they would have to go to a physical center to go and vote. For example, the embassy or the high commission or wherever in all of these countries. For me, like I said, I would have preferred a situation where e-voting, would have been tabled before this. It's not looking like, the political system favors e-voting. I'm not quite sure why, or maybe I do know why. Just my thoughts. Well, at least we'll take what we can get for now. So diaspora voting, yes, it's quite commendable. It would be nice to know what the structure behind that is planned to be. Hoping that this eventually does get passed, does get signed, and all of that. Also looking at the other bill, which is the bill to ensure adequate funding for mineral resource exploration and extraction through public-private partnerships. So we've spoken quite a lot about expanding our revenue sources, just beyond just petroleum and oil resources. And mineral resources are very, very, good opportunity for us, because we have a lot of mineral resources across the country. Now, it's in relation to that, how those mineral resources are considered in relation to federal income, for me, is also another conversation. Because, for example, with the derivation policy, the oil producing states get 13%, for example. But we have a situation where Zamfara has gold, and gold is not treated the same way as petroleum. I've heard very many arguments around why that is. I really still can't understand it. My preference would have been for each state, in a true federation, each state would be in control of its own natural resources. So we wouldn't even need a derivation policy in the first place, because, for example, Delta states, if they produce oil, they get to keep their oil and contribute something to the federal government. Zamfara, if they produce gold, they get to keep their gold and contribute
something as well.
Enugu, if they have coal, they get to keep their coal and contribute something. That should be the ideal approach, But I think the cost of oil is what has held us down for so long,
right?
Because we're so fixated on it. So back to this. So hopefully, this bill is also a commendable bill. It should be able to at least inspire development within the states, and hopefully encourage other state governors to look inwards and tap into the mineral resources that they have.
All right, Mr. C. Let us quickly run through this particular story, because I actually want to talk about this one. Time has flown by, but I need to touch on it coming out of the punch. Still talking about oil. The Dangote Petroleum Refinery has begun the export of refined petroleum products to neighboring West African countries, a sign to traders that the mega refinery's operations could soon potentially shake up regional fuel markets.
Yeah, so this is cheering news for once, that the refinery is up and running and it's begun its first export. No, this is not its first export, but this is the first export to an African country. Now, the vessel is currently somewhere off the Togolese waters, and it's typical that around those waters is then transshipped onto a bigger vessel and then taken to wherever the final destination is. Now, also in this story, we're told that The Dangote refinery is in advanced talks with Ghana, Angola, Namibia, and South Africa to supply petrol. Then they've commenced initial discussions with Niger, Chad, Burkina Faso, and the Central African Republic. Now, what does this tell us? Very quickly, once these countries are serious, they see an opportunity to lower costs and they're willing to exploit. Now, remember that Ghana has oil,
Mm.
Angola has oil,
Oh yes.
but they still want to get, because they've looked at it from top to bottom, and they believe that getting it from the Dangote refinery is cheaper than importing it from outside Africa. Now, by the time the Dangote refinery closes out all these transactions, right, it should be operating at full capacity or close to full capacity. And this is a clear example of what happens when people are determined to work, when things, the procedures and processes in place.
Mm.
And you can imagine how this will work out for those countries. Now, here we're still dancing on local crude supply, Naira sales. We don't know where we are. I guess the Dangote refinery has signed agreements with the marketers. It also has a signed agreement with NNPC. Where are we with that? Have they fully commenced? Is the NNPC in a position to give them all the crude they need? Because, for example, I want to believe that Angola will send crude to the Dangote refinery, refine for us, we'll pay your refining fee, and send it back, send petrol to us. Now, same thing with Ghana, because Ghana currently imports its petrol from Rotterdam. Now, where are we with supplying the Dangote refinery with crude? But more importantly, this is a private refinery working. Where are we with the state-owned refineries? Just the other day, the NNPCL spokesperson said they had surmounted whatever challenges they had with the Port Harcourt refinery, but still could not provide a clear date as to when we should expect operations to resume.
Well, if I remember correctly, he said shortly
Yeah,
was the
so
response.
yes, because I'm trying to be very polite because I don't understand what shortly means. So this is a private refinery working. Why aren't the state-owned refineries working? And I do pray they can close these deals out and even more deals, because remember, he's not in the business of charity. He took out loans to build that facility, and he has to start repaying. He's repaying the loans. So let's hope Nigeria doesn't happen to him and his refinery, and inspiration to the NMPCL to get his own refineries working.
Well, let's hope they are inspired to do what it is that they need to do. Gilbert Musa says, on the proposed investments in the power sector, let us cast our minds back to August 2004 when the federal government awarded over 19 power contracts valued at 25 billion naira for construction of transmission lines and substations across the country. What happened to the money invested in this laudable project? Very good question. Jane says, most federal universities can't fall back on their students because the students don't feel they got anything from the school. I mean, after strikes and so on and so forth, no hostels. This is Peter. Peter says, trying to understand Nigeria is not normal. The action of National Assembly shows clearly that supposed lawmakers don't know the law. Shameful. What I'm worried about is what legacy these current politicians are going to leave behind. You're thinking too far, Peter. Legacy. Long, long. Idimapusa says, power sector has been the conduit pipes through where our commonwealth has been flowing through for many years. One of. Yet, darkness is our first game. May God help Nigeria. Dapo from Berkeley Square. Dapo, you get out and about. Too. It's rather ironic that petrol pump prices are going up. There's more to meet the eye than all our mundane analysis. Too much economic sabotage is taking place. Ajayi Olonilua says all these rigmaroles about these discos is nothing but a waste of resources. Let every state set up their own power companies to generate and supply electricity to their people. And I think I can squeeze one more. Emeka says, I think the reason federal universities are insisting to be run by the indigenous people is because they feel they'll help getting their own people get employed into the school. Same thing we see at the teaching hospitals. I wonder how that has benefited Nigeria in the long run. Hey, here we are. Anyways, we need to call it a morning on the show. Thank you so much for your messages, and thank you so much, Mr. C and Gbubemi, for joining me on a Thursday morning. Great having you guys in.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for having me close out the week properly, productively, and rewarding manner.
Mm.
Be fruitful.
Be fruitful and follow due process. Keep it tuned to Smooth 98.1. We'll get into the grapevine at 8:15.